Hello everybody, today I'm going to be talking about Muammar al-Gaddafi. Who is he? He was one of the most influential leaders in history of Africa. His 4-decade rule over Libya brought dramatic transformations, intense controversies, and lasting consequences that still shape the country today. To some, Gaddafi was an anti-imperialist hero who stood up to the Western powers and used Libya's oil wealth to improve their education, their healthcare, and their infrastructures. To others, he was a corrupt authoritarian who suppressed dissent, funded militia groups, and created a political system dependent entirely on his own personality. In his early years, he was born in 1942 in Sirte, which is a coastal city in central Libya. He grew up in a Bedouin tent belonging to the Qaddafi tribe, which was a relatively small tribe in Africa compared to the Wafala, for example. His upbringing in a poor nomadic family shaped his later political identity. Gaddafi often portrayed himself as a man of the people, a leader who understood Libya's tribal roots and the struggles of an ordinary citizen. As a child, he received the traditional Islamic education before attending school in Sabaha and then later in Benghazi. According to his own accounts, he was influenced by the stories of the resistance against the Italian colonization, which ended in 1943. His formative years were marked by a growing sense of nationalism and anger at the foreign influence in the Middle East. The 1956 Suez Crisis is when Britain, France, and Israel attacked Egypt after Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. This became a turning point for him. Instead of being intimidated by the Western power, Gaddafi saw how the international pressure forced the invaders to withdraw, which convinced him that Arabs could resist and win against imperialism. Nasser was the Egyptian president and the leader of Pan-Arab movement. Soon became one of Gaddafi's biggest political idols. Nasser preached Arab unity, socialism, and anti-colonialism. Gaddafi followed his speeches closely, studied his writings, and adopted similar goals. Many of his future policies were modeled after Nasser's, though Gaddafi's version was more radical and idealistic. After graduating from the military academy in 1965, Gaddafi joined the Libyan army as an officer, while serving, he quietly organized a group of young nationalist officers who were dissatisfied of letting foreign companies dominate the country's oil industry. These frustrations, paired with Gaddafi's growing revolutionary ambition, set the stage for a pretty dramatic political change that followed shortly after. His rise to power started on September 1st, 1969. Gaddafi and his group of officers launched a bloodless coup while King Idris was abroad for medical treatment, which was starting to happen more frequently since he was getting older and sicker. The coup succeeded immediately. Obviously, without their leader there, it's going to succeed. Gaddafi was only 27 years old. He emerged as the leader of the new Revolutionary Command Council, which was shortened to the RCC. Becoming the youngest head of the state in the world at the time, from the beginning, Gaddafi adopted a highly symbolic style of leadership. He didn't want a formal title like president. Instead, he wanted to be called a brotherly leader and a guide of the revolution. Gaddafi's rule was interesting. He banned alcohol, emphasized Islamic morality, and expelled foreign military bases. His early actions were popular domestically and in the Arab world. Many saw him as the new Nasser, which was a charismatic anti-imperialist Arab nationalist rising to challenge the Western influence. Gaddafi also began asserting control over Libya's oil resources. He renegotiated the contracts with the foreign companies and increased Libya's profits by a lot. These actions earned him admiration from other developing countries and gave Libya the financial means to dramatically raise its standards of living during that time in the 1970s. This is how they got better healthcare systems, how their education was funded, and how they also funded the infrastructures. From 1975 to 1979, Gaddafi actually published what he called the Green Book, which is divided into three political parts. Well, three parts. One is political, economic, and then social. And these are all like his theories and his philosophy of like how he thinks a government should be ran. So starting off with his political, Gaddafi argued that representative democracy was a form of deception because the citizens were manipulated into voting for people who they really did not want to represent them. And instead, he proposed a system of direct democracy through local people's Congress, which would allow the people to vote for who they really wanted. In reality, these Congresses had little power, and the decisions ultimately followed back to Gaddafi and the revolutionary committees who controlled political life. So his domestic or social theory policies, he wanted to express his opinion on the culture, women's rights, athletics, and just religion. And he was very controversial in these, and a lot of them were taken controversially. His arguments for traditional gender roles was one of the main things that people pushed back on. But in the Green Book became a requirement of reading in Libyan schools and was essential part to attempt to shape Libyan identity. Overall, his ideology, mixed with Islamic principles, Arab nationalism and socialism, tribal values, and personal imagination, was unlike any other political system in the world, and it truly was one of its own at the time. His economic policies, or his theory, was that he argued that wage labor was essentially slavery. His solution was state-regulated collective ownership, where the workers controlled their workspaces. He also believed that the house is a basic need, and therefore it should belong to its occupant and not the landlords. These policies attempted to eliminate class distinctions, but they often caused mismanagement and economic stagnation as the government grew overly centralized. Although he claimed to abolish traditional government structures, Gaddafi ruled Libya through an inaccurate and often oppressive security network. The revolutionary committees acted as ideological enforcers. They monitored the universities, the workplaces, and people's neighborhoods, which pressured the people to show the loyalty to the regime. Dissenters risked arrest, torture, and forced discipline. Gaddafi also created multiple overlapping intelligence agencies so none could become powerful enough to challenge him. This created an atmosphere of fear and competition within the government. Libya's political prisons, such as Abu Salim, became notorious for harsh conditions and mass executions. He also developed a cult of personality. Portraits of Gaddafi were displayed everywhere. State TV broadcast his speeches for hours, and often official events were centered around praising him. The cult of personality grew especially after extravagant in his later years, when he began wearing increasingly colorful and elaborate outfits that surrounding himself with female bodyguards instead of the male bodyguards. Libya prospered economically during the early years of Gaddafi's rule, due largely to the massive oil revenues and the reserves of oil. They had the free healthcare, they had free education up to university level, so K through 12 basically was free for them. They had subsidized housing, infrastructure development, and the Great Man-Made River Project. Having all of these resources allowed the people of Libya to live comfortably without having to worry about where they were going to see a doctor at or where they were going to get a valuable education. The Great Man-Made River was one of the largest water engineering projects in the world. This project transported fresh water from deep desert aquifers to coastal cities. Supporters argued that it was one of the greatest infrastructural achievements in African history. Despite these successes, Libya's economy suffered from major structural problems. Overdependence on oil meant that the country did not develop strong industries and agriculture. And Gaddafi discouraged private enterprises and foreign investment for decades, leaving the economy unable to diversify. So they were all this, like, it was all the same. Many jobs were created through the state, leading to inefficiency and corruption. And by the 1990s, mismanagement and international sanctions severely weakened by the economy, contributing to the rising of frustration among the Libyans. Gaddafi's foreign policy was ambitious, it was unpredictable, and it often controversial. His early years were dominated by efforts to unify Arab countries. He attempted political unions with Egypt, Tunisia, Sudan, and Syria, though all failed quickly due to disagreements and distrust. Arab's leaders found Gaddafi erratic and unrealistic. He soon became marginalized within the Arab League. This rejection partially explains why Gaddafi shifted his focus towards Africa and away from trying to become one with other countries. He donated billions to African nations, and funded their infrastructure projects and helped establish the African Union in 2002. He tried to position himself as a champion of African independence from foreign influence and even declared himself the King of Kings of Africa. During the meeting with a traditional tribal leader, at the same time, Gaddafi involved Libya in armed conflicts and covert operations. Mostly notable war was at Chad during the 1980s when Libya attempted to annex North Chad, but the conflict ended in humiliation. In 2011, the uprising and the fall of Gaddafi happened. In Arab Spring of 2011, the Middle East and North Africa, toppling regiments in Tunisia and Egypt. Protests erupt in Libya, starting in Benghazi. Demonstrators demanded political reforms, anti-corruption measures, and an end to Gaddafi's authoritative rule. Gaddafi's response was with violence and crackdowns, which only intensified the uprising. As cities like Misrata and Benghazi rebelled, the conflict escalated into a civil war. When Gaddafi vowed to show no mercy to civilians in rebel-held areas, the United Nations authorized a no-fly zone, and NATO forces led by the United States, France, and the United Kingdom launched airstrikes to protect the civilians and support the rebels. After months of fighting, rebel forces captured the Tripoli in August. Gaddafi fled but was captured and killed in Sirte on October 20th, 2011. His death marked the end of one of the longest-standing authoritarian reigns in the modern era. Gaddafi's legacy was a lot. He did a lot during his time reigning, but some of the positive aspects that he had during his reign was there was a massive improvement in the education and the literacy programs in the schools. There was also free healthcare and social welfare programs to help out those in need who were poor, like Gaddafi when he was growing up. another positive aspect was also their infrastructure projects, especially the Great Man-Made River. This helped out them a lot. The Pan-African democracy supported for African liberation movements, and then a period of relatively stability during the early decades, which is what they needed when establishing their country. They needed stability, and that is what Gaddafi provided to them. So I think he did fairly well in his earlier reigning, but as his reigning went on, it definitely became into those more negative aspects, which is what I'm going to talk about now. His negative aspects were the systematic human rights abuses, his political repression and lack of basic freedoms, his international terrorism and conflicts, and his economic mismanagement and corruptions. These weaknesses became really clear after his death when Libya fractured into competing militias and rival governments. Without Gaddafi's centralized control, the country struggled, and the transition toward democracy did as well. In conclusion, Gaddafi's life and rule represents one of the most remarkable political stories of the modern time. He rose from the poor Bedouin background and became a revolutionary leader, shaped Libya's identity for over 40 years, confronted global powers, and attempted to build a political system unlike any other in the world. Yet his ambitions developed into authoritarianism, panorama, and repression. The contradiction between his revolutionary ideals and his dictatorial governance lies at the heart of his legacy. Whether viewed as a visionary, a tyrant, or something in between, Gaddafi's impact on Libya was lasting. His story serves as a powerful reminder of how deeply one leader can shape the destiny of an entire nation for the better or for the worse. Thank you. That is all I have for today.